evening. Welcome to GW. I'm Yan-Ho Kim, Associate Director of GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIX. We call ourselves GWIX, and please don't call us GWIX. Thank you for joining today's panel discussion, Bridging the Divide, Trade and Immigration Policy in US-ROK Relations in 2025. This event is co-hosted with the Sejong Society and the Korean American Institute. In the past, our Korea-related policy events have mainly focused on North Korea, US-ROK alliance, or major political developments in both countries. But these days, we're seeing more attention on economic security, trade, and tariffs in US-Korea relations. And now, immigration has also become a key issue, shaping trade and investment between the two countries. So today's discussion couldn't be more timely and relevant, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our distinguished speakers tonight. Now, let me turn it over to Andrew Jung, President of the Sejong Society, and Sharon Kwon, Program Director of the Korean American Institute, for their welcoming remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. So first, I want to say thanks to the GW Institute for Korean Studies and the Korean American Institute for their wonderful partnership on this event. So my name is Andrew Jung. I'm the current president of the Sejong Society. The Sejong Society is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness about U.S.-Korea relations and also be that networking space for young professionals interested in Korean policy. We do that through policy programming such as this event, and also through our newsletter where our members also write Korean policy articles covering current affairs. If you're interested in getting to know us more after the event, feel free to come to me or any of our members, and I'll Sharon, please.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Sharon Kwon, and I'm the Program Director of the Korean American Institute, otherwise known as KAI. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the interests of the Korean American community by producing insightful and actionable research. Our goal is to improve decision-making on critical issues facing Korean Americans. We're thrilled to partner with our co-hosts, the George Washington University Institute for Korean Studies and the Sejong Society, to bring you today's event. Thank you all for being here this evening on a school night for what promises to be a very important and engaging conversation. If anyone would like to learn more about the work that we do, I'll be around after this event. And please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start the panel discussion by briefly introducing the speakers. The first speaker is Tammy Overby, a partner at DGA Group Government Relations. She most recently served as Senior Director at McLarty Associates, and previously she was Senior Vice President for Asia and President of the US-Korea Business Council at the US Chamber of Commerce, and President of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea. And the next speaker is Aaron Chung, the Charles D. Miller Professor of East Asian Politics and Director of Undergraduate Studies in the Department of Political Science at Johns Hopkins University. She previously served as founding co-director of the Racism, Immigration, and Citizenship Program and director of the East Asian Studies Program at Hopkins, and as co-president of the APSA Migration and Citizenship section. Last but not least, joining us today is Woojin Shin, partner and co-chair of the Economic Development Practice and Industry Group at Nelson Mullins Riley and Scarborough LLP, a law firm. He frequently serves as a lead counsel for large-scale manufacturing projects in the US, many involving multi-billion-dollar capital expenditures and significant national security considerations. Hopefully, you're not charging us by the hour today. With that, let's begin with Tammy. I've asked Tammy to speak on migration, tariffs, and investment in the US-Korea context. And Tammy, based on your decades-long experience on Korea, how would you advise your clients navigating these overlaps?
I'd tell them to hire good consultants like me, like Woojin, and I'd tell them to talk to great experts like Aaron, and to come to programs like this. So I want to also thank all of the groups supporting for the kind invitation tonight. We're coming together after South Korea had a very successful week hosting APEC. And for those of you who are not APEC experts, APEC is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. It's a grouping of 21 economies in Asia. And when countries agree to host APEC, it's a year-long commitment, and it's a series of over 200 meetings. And I think this year it's important to note that South Korea did this for half of the year without an elected president. It's quite remarkable how well they coordinated all of these meetings. I went to the trade ministerial meeting in Jeju in May. Again, still they didn't have an elected president, but it was incredible how well organized it was and how successful it went. I unfortunately had to cancel my trip to APEC for last week. I'm old. I'm having hip replacement next week, so my doctor wouldn't let me travel. But my clients who were in Gyeongju and Busan, and I had a client staying on a cruise ship, somebody staying in an Airbnb, and if you sponsored APEC, you could stay in Gyeongju. So my clients were quite happy and said the Korean government did a remarkable job. But I think it's also important for us to note that it's a testament to the professionalism and global leadership of Korean officials. Now, I've had the privilege of observing US-Korea relations for over 35 years. I did live in Seoul for 21 years. I was president of the American Chamber of Commerce for 14 of those years. And then I was recruited back to Washington to run the US Chamber's Asia program, and at the same time was president of the US-Korea Business Council. So again, I'm old, but I've been doing it a long time and I still have most of my faculties. What began between the US and Korea as a very contentious trade relationship in the late 80s and early 90s, we were fighting all the time. But it has really evolved into a close collaborative partnership, and it's anchored by the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement, or what we call the Chorus FTA, which took effect in 2012 after a long and arduous, challenging time to get the US Congress to ratify it. But for perspective, the US only has 3 free trade agreements in Asia. We have one with Singapore, we have one with Australia, and our newest one with South Korea. And I should note that the Chorus FTA is the second largest US trade pact after the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. So it is very important. And that agreement eliminated almost all tariffs between our two countries, including on autos. And I'll explain why that's important in a minute. Another notable shift in our relationship over the last few years has been the explosive surge of Korean investment in the United States. Korean companies that you know, Samsung, Hyundai, Kia, maybe you know SK Hynix, and a lot you've never heard of, Pungsan, Doosan, people now know Hanwha, but lots of Korean companies in EV batteries, in autos, pharmaceuticals, in solar, in logistics, in steel, in shipbuilding. Again, many companies don't realize that Bobcat, which was bought by Doosan, is now a Korean company. Or Schwann's frozen food was bought by CJ Cheiljedang, also now a Korean company. So Korea is now among the top investors, foreign investors in the United States. And these investments are creating tens of thousands of well-paying 21st century jobs. Now, following the recent summit between President Trump and President Lee last week in Korea, in Busan, an agreement was reached to reduce the U.S. auto tariffs on Korean vehicles from 25% to 15%. But first, their National Assembly has to submit legislation to create a legal framework for Korea's investment package pledge. That's $350 billion that the Koreans have agreed to invest in the U.S. Now, once Korea submits the bill to the National Assembly, then President Trump will issue an executive order and that will reduce Korea's tariffs to 15%, which will put Korea on par with Japanese and European products. And that's really important because before President Trump was elected this time, thanks to the Chorus FTA, again, I mentioned our tariffs were almost zero. The U.S. auto tariff, what we charge other countries when they send their cars here, was 2.5%. But because of Chorus, Korea was zero. So Korea's been paying zero auto tariffs, but Japan and the Europeans, they've been paying 2.5. But because Japan and Europe were able to negotiate reciprocal deals faster than South Korea was, their tariffs fell to 15%. So for the last several weeks, Toyota, Honda, BMW, Mercedes, their cars have been flowing in at a 15% tariff, but Hyundai, Kia, oh, and there's one other company, General Motors Korea, who also makes cars in Korea and exports them to the U.S. They've been paying 25%. President Trump would say, well, GM should move all their auto processing, manufacturing to the U.S. But, President Trump, I think in many ways is a great businessman, but he's not an international businessman where for manufacturing. In manufacturing, you want to be close to your customers. So General Motors bought Doosan, Daewoo, a failed Korean car company many years ago to be close to their customers in Korea and in Asia. Last year, Korea exported 1.4 million vehicles to the United States. 400,000 were from General Motors. The million were from Hyundai and Kia. Now, soon, as soon as Korea's National Assembly puts that legislation to the National Assembly, then President Trump can issue the executive order, and then we can drop the tariffs. The deal also produced tariff relief for Korean wood products, pharmaceuticals, and aircraft parts, although not for steel and aluminum. Korea is still paying 50% on that. Now, Korean chip makers, which again, Samsung, SK Hynix, they're going to enjoy equal treatment with Taiwanese competitors once the U.S. and Taiwan finish their deal. And I think that deal will come soon. I think the U.S. was waiting until after Trump and Xi met. So that deal should be announced soon. The other good news from that summit was Korea did not have to make any changes to its beef or rice markets. Again, their markets are already wide open. But for beef 30 months and older, and that's a tiny percentage of the beef the U.S. exports, we are not able to export that to Korea. It's an overhang left from when we had a problem with mad cow disease. But right now, Korea is the largest importer of American beef. So I didn't want anything to happen to mess up that market. One of the other key points that came out of the summit last week was, and again, this is where I think Korea in some ways got a better deal than Japan. Korea took their time. They did not rush. And President Lee said several times that he wanted that the calendar would not drive the negotiation. National interest would. He wanted to make sure he got a balanced, fair deal. Now, what President Trump was demanding was $350 billion cash up front. That's a lot of money. For an economy Korea's size, to put it in perspective for you, Korea's foreign exchange reserves for the country's cash stash of dollars at the end of August was $418 billion. So $350 billion of that, I'm not good at math, but my calculator told me that was like 86%. President Lee said in a Time magazine interview 3 weeks ago, if he agreed to that, he would be impeached. Now, as somebody who lived in Seoul when they had their last big foreign exchange crisis, that was 97, 98, I can tell you he would be impeached. When I look at the size of Korea's foreign exchange reserves, it's really too much. And when I talk to for an economy their size, when I talk to my friends at the Ministry of Finance, why do you have so many? They remind me because we remember 97, 98. So I asked them, how much is enough? And what they tell me is there is no number, that that pain is so fresh in their mind that they just need more. So I think when President Lee was able to convince, he and his negotiators convinced the U.S. to accept the 200 billion of the 350 billion will be given in cash, but it will be given in increments of not more than 20 billion a year. So they capped it. And it's not going to be a blank check for 20 billion. It will be based on project milestones. Both sides have agreed that these projects must be commercially viable. So I think the details that came out about the South Korean package were quite good. And again, the Korean negotiators, Trade Minister Yohan Koo, who some of you may know, he spent 2.5 years in DC at the Peterson Institute. And when he first came here, he called me and said, what am I going to do? And I said, well, and forgive me, I'm going to be very candid. I said, I'm going to pimp you out. I'm going to call all my friends at the trade associations and all of the companies I know, and I'm going to tell them when you do programs on South Korea, they all ought to call you, because we are so lucky and blessed to have a former trade minister, because he was trade minister in the last administration before Yoon, the Moon Jae-in administration. To have somebody of that caliber here and willing to talk to us, it was terrific. So he made a lot of friends in the last 2.5 years. And then when the new president, Lee Jae-myung, appointed him as trade minister, he hit the ground running. They've got a great MOTI minister, Minister of Trade, Industry, and Energy, Kim Jong-won, the Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, and then a Chief Policy Minister. Those 4 guys went back and forth. There were probably 35 or 40 trips from mid-July until now to get this deal. So they worked. The amounts of trips they took were incredible, but they got a good deal. And so again, now 200 billion will be in cash over a 20-year period, and 100 billion will go towards collaborating on shipbuilding. There are also new opportunities in the fields of critical minerals, civil nuclear energy. Korea Zinc has just signed an MOU with Lockheed Martin to provide a critical mineral called germanium. And both countries are going to partner in small modular reactors. The U.S. is really good in technology. South Korea is really good in advanced manufacturing economically. And President Trump surprised everybody, including people in his own Defense Department last week when he approved South Korea's development of nuclear-powered submarines. And then yesterday, Pete Hegseth at the Security Consultative Meeting in Seoul confirmed that, yes, we support that. Now, regarding the ICE raids, nobody expected that. To see the video of over 400 people being arrested, and in particular, 317 hardworking, rule-following Koreans handcuffed and shackled. That video was shocking, not just to Korea. I've had calls from clients in Taiwan, in Japan, asking what the heck is going on. And I think what's going to happen, the incident, it highlighted a broader issue, the Trump administration's conflicting policy priorities between immigration and investment, as well as America's shortage of skilled labor. Now, as we move forward, and again, I'll end here, it's vital that both countries, both governments reaffirm trust. We need to uphold the Chorus framework. The U.S. should stop violating that agreement. And we've got to align our immigration, trade, and investment policies. Korea's advanced manufacturing and innovation are crucial to the United States' competitiveness. And our shared prosperity depends on strengthening, not straining that partnership. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions during Q&A.
Thank you. Now, Erin, turning to you, I'd like to ask you to focus on Trump's immigration policy and its spillover effects to the U.S.-Korea relationship. So how do you think these policies, Trump's immigration policies, have affected Korean companies and skilled workers working in the United States? and perhaps also the Korean American community more broadly.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me back. It's great to be back and to see some familiar faces. So I'm going to start with a broad overview. My work largely focuses on migration and citizenship policies in Northeast Asia, largely on Northeast Asian democracies of South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, which, as you all know, are non-Western democracies that both send and host substantial populations of migrants, and that until recently maintained among the most exclusionary immigration policies among all liberal democracies, right? But one thing also that was sort of standing out among Northeast Asian democracies was not only they were kind of representing negative cases of immigration because they have low levels of immigration relative to their levels of economic and political development, but also they're one of the few wealthy democracies where immigration has not occupied central stage in politics, right? So we know that especially in those of us in the United States are reminded often on a daily basis that immigration has become one of the most politicized issue areas, right, of the day, as it's often linked to religion, gender equality, public health, jobs, and trade, right? So this is not new. And certainly we have seen a visible swing to the right across Europe for the last decade, that where voters have elected far-right candidates that have been running explicitly on anti-immigrant rhetoric. And just last month, we saw the election of Sanae Takaichi, right, in Japan, who was elected as leader of the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, representing the election not only of Japan's first female prime minister, but also the first candidate who ran on explicitly anti-immigrant and more specifically anti-foreign sentiment to be elected leader of the LDP, right? So this is actually very, very new for Japan. And while we have witnessed the rise of anti-foreign and specifically anti-Chinese sentiment in South Korea, especially over the past year, it's really not been a prominent feature in electoral politics in South Korea, and certainly was not a feature in the presidential elections earlier this year, right? But immigration has more recently occupied central stage in South Korea when we witnessed, as Tammy noted, what appeared to be a violent clash between domestic priorities and diplomatic relations, as the current US administration immigration policies really threaten to upend the sensitive trade negotiations talks between the United States and South Korea. So here, of course, I am referring to the one of the most extensive immigration raids in recent US history, in which more than 300 South Koreans were detained out of more than 475 at the Hyundai LG battery plant in Georgia, which in itself is one of the largest foreign investment projects in Georgia and is the largest industrial project in Georgia's history. Now, the Department of Homeland Security had stated that all 475 workers who were taken into custody were in the United States illegally because they had crossed the border into the United States illegally, or they had overstayed their visas. And especially in the case of the Korean workers, because their visas did not permit them to be working, which was very questionable. So. And of course, the timing was something that came up a lot too, because this incident, as you recall, occurred just a week after President Lee Jae-myung had visited the White House, and during which South Korea had promised hundreds of billions of dollars in US investments, as Tammy discussed, to reach a tariff deal. And this raised immediate questions, right, about how this would impact trade negotiations and especially the prospects for South Korean investment in the United States, right? But it also sparked widespread outrage across the really sharp partisan divides that we're seeing in South Korea today. And some people even refer to this as alliance betrayal, right? not only because of the timing, but also because of the humiliating, heavy-handed, and widely televised display of South Korean citizens who were lined up, handcuffed, shackled, and detained like criminals, or as one Korean editorial called, prisoners of war, which was in itself a highly orchestrated display for consumption by the domestic US and also local Georgia audience. There was one protester banner at Incheon Airport that asked, why should South Korea continue to invest in the United States after such backstabbing, right? Now, of course, we know that the detained workers were taken back to South Korea after a week in detention. And this was, of course, on a chartered Korean Airlines flight. But questions still remain about the repercussions for South Korean investment in the United States. Lee Jae-myung had stated shortly after the incident that companies would be very hesitant about investing in the US following the raid. There's also the thorny issue about the visas, right? So South Korea has long been asking the United States to provide short-term visas for high-skilled workers, and this had never been approved. And still there are some questions about what kind of work can be done with the visa waiver program, right? And of course, the biggest question remains, what are the ripple effects on the US-ROK alliance? But what I really want to point out is that the shock about the raid was not the raid itself. So not what happened, but who was targeted, right? So this is based on the assumption that Koreans and perhaps East Asians more broadly were somehow immune from the Trump administration's sweeping immigration raids and detention, because the focus, as we've seen, has been on the southern border and largely on the Latino population. But we know, historically speaking, that the relationship between immigration control in the United States and the Korean American community is not new, right? This is definitely not the first time. Koreans and Asians and Asian Americans more broadly have been central to immigration control in the United States. In fact, immigration control from the late 19th century was directed primarily at China and especially Chinese workers, and eventually other Asian immigrant populations. So the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese laborers from admission to the United States, was the United States' first federal policy that banned entry on the basis of not just nationality, but also race, right, or ethnicity. I recently attended a talk by Brianna Nofil, who wrote a really interesting book on the migrants' jail, where she described the creation of explicitly what were called Chinese jails in upstate New York, specifically for Chinese migrants who were trying to cross the Canadian border in violation of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, right? And we also know that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which is now being used to justify the current mass deportations, had previously been used to justify the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, including US citizens, right? And of course, the Immigration Act of 1924, which excluded any, quote, alien ineligible for citizenship. And this was based on the law that banned any alien or immigrant who was not a free white male in 1790 from acquiring citizenship. And this basically banned most immigration from non-European countries and certainly from Korea until 1952, right? So these severe restrictions on Asian immigration in the Western Hemisphere basically blocked all Korean migration to the Americas, which kept the number of Koreans in the United States, including the mainland and Hawaii, basically below 10,000 throughout that first half of the 20th century. That's why Koreans had among the smallest community among other East Asians in the United States. And there's also been a direct impact of immigration policy on generations of Korean and other Asian Americans. So the Trump administration's other major immigration control policies are just one of many that have really had a formative shape on how Korean communities have shaped and been reshaped by immigration policies. And they're going to have continuing deep repercussions for generations of Koreans and other Asian Americans. So the executive order, for example, to curtail birthright citizenship for some US-born children, really is going to have, if it were to actually go through, is going to have a major impact on all Asian immigrant communities that have really been sustained to a certain degree through birthright citizenship, right? And just to remind you, the birthright citizenship debate, in many ways, is centered around a Chinese American, right? And I'm referring to the 1898 landmark case of the U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, which was a case involving a Chinese American, right? And the deportation of foreign nationals, including permanent residents with minor or major criminal violations or records, regardless of how minor, this could be, speeding tickets, right? Really are impacting Koreans throughout the diaspora and the United States, but especially one group that we often forget, which are Korean adoptees, right? Many of whom never gained US citizenship. And certainly we have the Child Citizenship Act of 2000, which granted automatic citizenship to international adoptees in order to address this problem, but it only covered future adoptees, right, after 2000, or those who were born after February of 1983. So this does not cover a really huge swath of Korean adoptees, many of whom arrived from the 1960s through the 1980s, right? And the impact on education diplomacy, right, and student flows and the bilateral mobility of workers as well as Korean investment has been impacted by the student interview delays that we saw earlier this year that probably, may have affected many of you, as well as the interview waiver rollbacks that were announced. And then, of course, the August proposal to cap stays and lighten the extension of F&J visas, right, for students, scholars, and physicians. This has led to an immediate disruption for Korean students and scholars that are heading to US universities and research institutions. And again, please note that South Koreans are the third largest among all international students in the United States, following India and China. So this will have a disproportionate effect on Korean students, but on US-ROK relations more broadly. It also means that there's increased scrutiny of South Korean students' social media posts, right? And if you think about what are they posting, right? South Korea had a pretty mass, democracy movement, not too long ago, right? Thank you. And so, you might see a lot of interesting social media posts by South Korean students. So that's something that they have to worry about. And also, this is something that is not necessarily opposed by a large proportion of the US population. The Pew Research Center recently had a survey that found that 40% of the respondents support limiting the number of international students from South Korea, right? And that the majority, over 50%, over 54% of Republicans surveyed supported limiting South Korean students. And then finally, the proclamation restricting entry of H-1B visa holders with a $100,000 fee, as you all heard of. And this pertains to high-skilled workers who are being employed by US companies, would, of course, disrupt Korean hires and intra-company transfers that could potentially undercut the workforce pipeline that are really tied to the two countries' supply chain projects. So the point that I want to make is that this Georgia raid was not a singular incident, right? But the most visible example of how US immigration policies are affecting and have affected US-ROK relations. And just a side note, it's certainly no coincidence that the factory in Georgia is only a couple hundred miles from where the March 16th, 2021 mass shootings occurred in Atlanta, where that resulted in the deaths of 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent and four of whom were Korean, right? So this is something that we should also keep in mind. This is not a coincidence, right? This is more of a pattern. So the final thing I would just like to say, and I'll probably revisit this during our discussion, is that I think that the US-ROK alliance will certainly weather the storm, right? South Korea in some ways has no choice, right? But I'm more worried about what this means for kind of the democratic institutions that are supporting immigrants worldwide, right? And as well as the numerous individuals that are being caught in this dragnet, right? And in some ways, South Korea is at a crossroads, right? It could either follow this worldwide trend of restricting immigration and relying on sort of, falling back on anti-immigrant rhetoric, or it could propose something a little bit more radical, right? And actually open up its immigration policies. And I think that's where South Korea is positioned to be today.
Finally, Woojin, I understand you have some insights to share on how Congress is debating ways to address the visa challenges facing the Korean workers, skilled workers, specifically in the US. So,
thank you. Thank you for having me here. So my perspective could be a little bit different from that of Tammy or Professor Chung, because I'm not an immigration lawyer, but I work for many large-scale manufacturing projects, including those mentioned by Tammy and Professor Chung. I served those projects as lead counsel. I negotiated site acquisition, state local incentive agreements for those projects. And many of them are very large with multi-billion capital investments with several thousand job creation goals. So even though I'm not a full-time immigration lawyer, the next issue after I finish those negotiations is always the question about how Korean companies can bring technicians and engineers to prepare the facility ready to hire American workers. Because since America has not done advanced manufacturing seriously for many decades, more than one generation, it's just impossible or prohibitively expensive to find someone who can make manufacturing equipment, machinery, or relevant IT systems in the US. And that's why they have to import those pieces of equipment and machinery from overseas, including countries like Korea, Japan, sometimes Germany. And when they do that, they have to bring technicians and engineers who can install those pieces of equipment and machinery. And the current visa framework, including the B visa and related visa waiver program, allows certain activities, but not all of them. So I actually was in Korea in September, right after the Georgia ICE raid, and was asked by my clients to give a presentation about the immigration risks and ICE raid. I actually gave presentation to probably more than 30 companies while I was there for 3 weeks. And I borrowed some of the slides you're seeing here from those presentation materials. So the current risk, Professor Kim asked me about the current status of the discussion within the Congress, but I will somewhat cover that topic, but I believe I was asked to talk about the practical aspect of this issue, because this is what my clients deal with on a daily basis. This is what they have been dealing with for decades. It's not a new issue, because not only Korean or like foreign project owners, but also American project owners have to deal with the same issue, because oftentimes they have to import manufacturing equipment from overseas. And when they do that, they have to invite foreign technicians and engineers to install the equipment. So there are some visa categories foreign nationals can use to work in the US for a variety of purposes. And I put them into, divided them into two categories there. One is the long-term visas. That is something called expat visas, L1, B2, H1B. Those are so-called expat visas for long-term stay in the US. Foreign nationals can stay somewhere between 5 years and 7 years, depending on the visa type. And they can work as business executives or skilled workers for foreign companies. And there's another, the other categories is a short-term visitor visa, which is B1. And there's a visa waiver program which permits or waives the visa requirement for B visa visitors for stay up to 90 days. So there are some categories of visa and related programs, but those visa categories do not cover all necessary tasks, especially the tasks needed to prepare the facility operational and be ready to hire American workers. And that is one of the reasons why the Hyundai LG factory had the ICE raid that it had in September. And the reason, in my mind, or the causation, is not really due to a fault of only one constituent. It's actually many constituents contributed to this risk. First can be the U.S. government. The biggest issue within the constituents or American voters, I would say, is their gross misunderstanding of American workers' availability and quality. So now many people are educated, especially in places like DC. But when I spoke with my American friends, colleagues, they're like, when they tell them that I work for these Korean, foreign manufacturing industries, they told me that, oh, that's great. We have great American manufacturing workforce. So everyone in the globe should come to the US and do the manufacturing projects here. My response to that comment is great American manufacturing workforce is non-existent compared to that of other advanced countries like Korea, Japan, and some European and Asian countries. So they believe that there are abundance of American workers who are capable and ready to work at those factories, but that's not true. We have to bring a lot of foreign nationals to prepare the facility ready because we cannot find technicians and engineers within the US who can do that. And we have to bring a lot of them to train American workers so that they know how to handle sophisticated pieces of equipment and machinery. And also the visa denials, it's a big issue for foreign nationals too. They have this consular office in different major cities around the globe. But oftentimes they do not lack understanding why the visa applicants are wanting to go to the US. Many assumes that those visa applicants have intent to stay in the US, regardless of whatever the application document says. But they do not understand that, especially when it comes to Korean technicians, engineers, they have no intent to go to somewhere remote in the US and become an illegal immigrant by overstaying their visa term or violating their visa because they have such a good life back in Korea. They want to finish their assignment, whether that's for 5 years or 7 years, and they want to go back to their family and friends as soon as possible. But consular officers sometimes, not always, but sometimes don't understand. I can share an anecdote about one of our clients, our firm's clients, who applied for the L or E visa in Seoul. So a Korean company that owns a factory in the US, they decide to send 2 technicians to their factory in the US. Why two technicians? It's their business decision, right? Maybe they want to run two shifts. Maybe they have equipment that needs to be handled by two technicians at the same time. But after granting the visa to the first applicant, the same consular officer rejected the second application, saying that I just approved the same visa application for your company, so you already have one technician, and so you have enough. And it is not their decision to make, but they have they lack understanding why Korean companies have to send their technicians to the U.S. They're not going there to steal American workers, but they're actually coming here to help American workers learn what they are supposed to do and develop American manufacturing and bring American manufacturing back to the U.S. And also there's some random visa waiver program cancellation. It creates a huge risk for many Korean nationals. So Korea is one of few countries whose national can enter the US up to 90 days without having a visa. So there's an agreement between the Korean government and the US government. But there's some very massive number of visa waiver program cancellation that prevents Korean nationals, technicians, engineers from coming to the US to help American workers. And also, as we could see, we have noticed from the Georgia ICE raid, there's some unreasonable enforcement of immigration law. I'm going to show you the relevant agency manual language in the next slide. But what Korean technicians were doing in Georgia when ICE raided the facility, the vast majority of those individuals were doing what's perfectly legal under the agency manual language. But they did not, the ICE agents did not really care about that. I guess what they cared about was 3,000 daily arrest quota that they had to satisfy. And so those are misunderstandings or issues the US government has. And also Korean government and Korean companies contributed to this situation because they lack of understanding and they lack this understanding and strategy. So by that, what I mean is, so I believe Professor Chung mentioned the Korean government asked the US government to create a visa category for Korean nationals for many times. I believe that was over 50 times in the past 10 years. However, I believe they have to pay attention to the difference between how the Korean government works and the US government works. Korea is such a centralized society. So if the president comes from the majority party of the National Assembly, then basically the president of Korea controls both the executive branch and the legislative branch. Which is not the case here because the US is a federalist country and the members of Congress are here to represent their own country, which is their state. And even if the president of the US is from the party that controls the Congress, the members of Congress from the same party does not just follow the president's direction because they have different interests. And Korean sometimes don't understand that. So they think by telling or making requests to the senior members of the executive branch, then they can be somehow conveyed to the members of the Congress, which is not the case here. So if Korean wants a new visa category for Korean nationals, they have to talk to the members of Congress because only Congress has the power to create a new visa category. And actually they did that. However, I don't think they understand how complicated the immigration issue politically, because I do not believe there are many members of Congress who would be happy to amend the immigration law, giving visas to foreign nationals, because that could jeopardize their next election, because many American voters would not like that. And applicants, also has some issues because they often make some mistakes when they tell the CBP officers at the port about their purpose of the visit. So a lot of Korean companies they work with the Korean government and their friends in DC to make some recommendations or suggestions about how to fix this problem. And there are two different approaches. Long-term approach is of course, to create a new visa category, which requires a congressional action. And there's several bills have been introduced to the effect, including the Partner with Korea Act. So that bill, if it is passed, will create a law to create an allotment of 15,000 visas for Korean nationals. But this is a significant number because 15,000 per year, that's 150,000 for 10 years. That's 300,000 visa slots in 20 years. And if I convert that number into four-member family, that law potentially can bring 1.2 million Korean nationals to the US. So it's a significant endeavor. It's not a simple undertaking. It will require a lot of convincing and persuasion to have that bill passed. There are some co-sponsors. In addition to these three numbers, there are two more who recently joined. I forgot to add them, but it is making progress. But the same bill was previously introduced in the past 10 years, but they all did not pass the muster of Congress. So if relevant constituents do not make due efforts, I think this bill will have the same fate when the current Congress ends in December next year. Short-term approach, it is easier because we can make some improvements by amending regulatory language, which can be done by the executive branch without having to convince Congress. So this is one of the examples. This is the language of the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is the State Department manual that permits foreign nationals to work on some installation activities. So it says applicants coming to the US to install, service, or repair equipment or machinery, they can do that under the B visa or visa waiver program. And some companies are suggesting to the US executive branch to add the underlined language because to install, service, and repair, that covers a large scope of activities. But the installation of these sophisticated pieces of machinery is not like plug and play type of installation. It's not like you buy a printer at Best Buy and just plug it in and it prints out the document. It requires, for example, if the equipment uses water, it's relevant to water or wastewater, the installation work will require plumbing work. And it is very difficult to find industrial scale plumbing expert in the US. So oftentimes the installation team includes a plumber who has dealt with this industrial scale plumbing work. For semiconductor manufacturing companies, their machinery is very sensitive to vibration. So often the installation team includes the forklift driver who knows how to handle the equipment, who knows how to move the equipment without creating a lot of vibration, which cannot be found in the US. So by amending the agency manual language, for example, like this, we can, it can be a patchwork, but still improve the situation. So I guess that's it.
That was, I think, a very informative, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of phone calls after this event. Let me open it up for a roundtable discussion among the speakers. For a lively and engaging discussion, let me play devil's advocate. I'm not that sarcastic person, but I will try. So I'm gonna throw in three different questions, and you can just pick up any question that you want to make comments, or you can even ask questions to other speakers. So first, we had a great summit meeting between President Trump and Lee Jae-myung, but $20 billion per year, even though it has to be commercially viable, still a huge amount, and a lot of Koreans are concerned about potential impact on their domestic industries and employment. So that's my first sarcastic question. And the second is, I think after the Georgia raid, South Korean people sort of suffered from collective psychological trauma. I mean, when they watched the news report showing their friends or family members or their fellow Koreans being shackled by their decades-long ally, I think that was a really shocking moments. So how can can the Korean friends, Korean investors, or Korean skilled workers overcome this trauma? That should be kind of invisible barriers down the road. Third, it seems to me that we have very low chance for Congress to pass a visa waiver program for the skilled Korean workers in the near future. I mean, we are seeing the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, and we still don't know when it will end, right? So would that mean, as far as the visa waiver program for skilled Korean skilled workers is concerned, is it safe to say it all boils down to White House's determination and willingness?
I'll happy to jump in. The question on the $20 billion per year, yeah, that is a lot of money. But I think what it's important to remember is that South Korean companies are already investing significantly more than that every year. And the reason they're doing that is because it's good for business. The US, with all of our problems, and we do have quite a few, we've highlighted a few tonight, but it is still a very good market. It is the largest economy in the world. And for the most part, I think the Korean companies that I talk to every day seem willing to sort of overlook the missteps that we've made this year because they see opportunity here. So I think they will continue to come because it's good for business. The psychological trauma, I completely understand that. I myself was shocked watching that video. I'm somebody who lived in Korea for so long. I've never seen anything like that. And again, I know Koreans well. They're rule-following people. I know many Korean executives, engineers who are coming back and forth, and I can't imagine how traumatic that was for them. And I'm sure for their families. For example, when I talk to some of my clients, they're saying, look, my staff's wives don't want them to travel because they don't want that to happen to them. So I really think it's incumbent on the US. We need to reassure our Korean friends about the safety and security for their employees. And again, I think at the highest levels, and by that I mean President Trump and President Lee well understand the issue. And I hope that they will take some steps to alleviate it. The question about Congress, I mentioned that the US has a free trade agreement with Korea. With most FTAs that we've done, we have given a quota of 15 or 20,000 e-visas. When we concluded the Chorus Free Trade Agreement, the US did not agree to give Korea that quota. So every year the Korean government has raised it. But the US government has said, oh, that's a congressional problem. It's really hard. You need to go talk to Congress. And while I think that's true, I also think that For example, when I was in Georgia recently, and they were asking me what should their elected Georgian officials be doing? They should be calling the White House. They should call all of their elected members of Congress, their congressmen, their senators, and remind them how important these investments are to their state. Again, these are great investments. These are good, high quality investments. They're helping us modernize our manufacturing. Again, we're going to have a renaissance in manufacturing thanks to Korean talent and their technology transfer. So I think it will end in a good place. But the other piece of advice I offer my Korean friends is that they need to talk to the press. Korean companies are very reluctant to talk to the press. They don't like to talk. And again, I lived in Korea for a while. I've had my own challenge with Korean press. Apologies if there are any online but it's true. Sometimes you get misquoted and it can cause problems. So if you look at who has been speaking since this incident, you'll find my name more than probably any Korean company's name. And Korea didn't have a sitting ambassador until recently. Ambassador Kang Kyung-hwa, she's on a campaign. You're going to see her traveling to these states very soon, and she will be talking, which I think is good. And again, helping Americans understand why these investments are good for America. When I was in Georgia, one reporter asked me, why are Koreans stealing our jobs? I laughed and said, they're not stealing our jobs, they're creating jobs. But until we get that factory built, the 8,500 jobs that this factory is going to create, they don't happen. They don't come. We've got to get the factory up and running. And even after it's up and running, we're going to need Koreans coming in. We need their management technology. We need to know how to build these EV batteries. We don't know. They've got the technology. Sorry, I get on a rant.
So I'll just comment briefly, and then I'm going to throw another provocative question, if you don't mind. So I think that you refer to the collective psychological trauma of the Georgia raids on those who, were televised and, humiliated, right, on television. But another thing that was a huge factor were the very degrading experience of being in detention for about a week, right? And the workers had commented on how bad the conditions were, right? And this is something that we've heard, countless times by others who have been in these detention facilities, right? And again, kind of going back historically, to the 19th century, early 20th century. There was some outrage that was expressed among the public to the jailing of migrants, right? Because there was a question of, are they criminals or are they just, migrants, right? And many migrants would say, in this locality, in this local's jail, I am a criminal, right? But in federal proceedings, I'm not. So, how do I clarify the status? But one of the concerns that some members of the public expressed, especially in regards to the jailing of white migrants, from European countries, was they were afraid that these migrants who were detained and deported would then become radicalized in their home countries and would carry with them a very negative image of the United States. And this is something that I think rings true for us today too, right? This is something that these workers experienced firsthand, right? And saw a part of the United States that hopefully many of us will never see, right? This is something that they're going to share with their families and their friends. So it will have a lasting impact on not just trust, but also perceptions of the United States. So what we might call US soft power, right? And so I don't know that this is something that can be easily, overcome. Certainly not just through policy. It's definitely about building trust. So the provocative question that I want to put out for you is whether or not, so maybe Tammy and Woojin and others would like to comment, this would maybe impact what we saw as a recent shift in industrial policy and investment policy in South Korea that was for very long kind of trying to be relying on the United States for security, but then fostering stronger relations with China. So those of you who speak Korean, it's the Anmi Gyeongjung policy, right? And this was what we're seeing with the increased investment in the United States is actually a shift away from that, right? So moving more toward U.S. investment. So I wonder if the two of you see any potential for this having an impact on that, and whether or not the previous policy of trying to go kind of be between China and the United States might prevail.
We'll try to respond to Professor Kim's three questions first, and I'll try to make some comments on the new question from Professor Chung. So regarding the annual $20 billion investment, I echo everything Tammy said, and I want to add a couple of comments there. So Tammy mentioned that America is the largest market in the globe, which is true. And the U.S. is the largest consumer market, and I recently read an article saying that it is larger than the second largest through eighth or ninth largest combined. So it's such a large market. So Korean companies, not only Korean companies, but all companies in different countries, they want to come here and do business because, I mean, frankly, this is probably the only market that they can safely invest and try to make some money. Because if you think about situations or economies of other countries, like China is as bad, their domestic economies is not that great. European countries, we don't have to even talk about them because they're going down for sure. Like Middle Eastern countries, like African countries, South American countries, they're not nowhere near the size of the market size of the U.S. So Korean companies will have to come here regardless of the obstacles. Of course, the U.S. government and U.S. constituents have many things that they can do to make it easier for those companies can do business, which is beneficial to Americans too, because I think there's no disagreement over whether America now wants manufacturing back on our soil. Everyone agrees that, right? But if you think about the manufacturing capabilities globally, there are only two countries can make almost everything at the global market competitive manner: China and South Korea. So Taiwan has light manufacturing and semiconductor, but they do not have shipbuilding, they do not have manufacturing, they do not have chemical. Japan used to be very strong, but after the Plaza agreement, they exported most of their domestic manufacturing capabilities to Southeast Asian countries. So if America wants to bring manufacturing back, but do not want to work with China, the only option is Korea. So making it easier for Korean companies to do business in the U.S., that is actually helping American manufacturing industries too. Regarding the trauma, I won't say anything about that because I appeared in a couple of YouTube shows when I was in September, and I made some neutral comment about that, and that I was called traitor by trying to be trying to explain why ICE had to do what they had to do. So, but again, regardless of, I mean, it is something that we have to overcome. That is, it's not hard, but I mean, the Koreans have overcome much more serious situations. So they will deal with that. Regarding whether White House has to make a call, again, it's really the Congress that has to make the move. But it's not an easy task for them to do because even if members of Congress believe that they have to create new categories of visas for nationals of countries like South Korea, like GOP members, they have to think about how anti-immigrant MAGA supporters would think about their legislative activities. And also Democratic members, they also have to take care of the interests of the unions. and unions do not like immigrants. So it's not an easy task for members of Congress to do, even if they think it is something that they should do. Regarding Professor Chang's comment, it is a well-known fact that China is least popular country in Korea. So there's a survey about how unpopular China is in different countries, and Korea. In the survey done in Korea, I believe they responded like 89%, close to 90% of Korean voters, Korean people do not like China. So I do not think this incident will make the needle move. So when I was in Korea in September, and I was in Korea last week, there are many anti-China protests happening in Seoul. So it's easy to go see especially young generation chanting President Xi go home, like Chinese go home, things like that. Anti-Chinese Communist Party. They said they're not against Chinese people. They said they're against Chinese Communist Party. So I do not. And also, the term 안미경중, the era of 안미경중, I believe it's gone now because most of Korean voters, regardless of their political tendency, that they believe that they have to be with the U.S., both for the security purposes and the economic purposes. And I believe recently the Korean foreign minister, in an interview with, I believe it was with CNN or NBC, when the American reporter asked him about the neutral position of Korea between China and the U.S., he responded that Korea has never been neutral between China and the U.S.
I would just add too that it's not just the visa problem. The U.S., the Trump policy of tariffs has caused significant challenge, not just to Korea, but around the world. And the impact that that's having is countries are beginning to see that they need to diversify perhaps away from the U.S. So we're seeing that towards Southeast Asia. We're seeing a lot of countries. I mean, they all still want to do deals with the U.S. While President Trump was in Kuala Lumpur on his way to Japan before Korea, he signed deals with Malaysia, with Thailand, with Vietnam, Cambodia, 2 trade deals and 2 framework deals. And while they do sign deals and they want the deals with the U.S., they're also working hard to increase their deals among RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, CPTPP, the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, something the U.S. used to be part of. President Trump withdrew us from on day 3 of 1.0. So I think it's more than just the visa issue, but countries are pragmatic. China is almost everyone's #1 trade partner. And, look at geography. Korea is right there, right next to China. So they have to balance. While I agree with the foreign minister, the U.S. is South Korea's security guarantor. So I think, push comes to shove, they are going to side with the U.S. But economically and, let's face it, the U.S., we've not been the friendliest. America first to other countries means they're second or last. It's maybe not a great policy for trying to bring countries together.
Now, let me open it up for a Q&A.
I know that man. Hey, Roger.
Hey, Tammy. So good evening. My name is Roger Rolando Reyes. I'm a recent graduate of the School of International Service at American University. My question is, immigration discourse in the United States is highly racialized, as reflected in comparisons between ICE enforcement tactics and historical slave patrols. Given this domestic political climate and the likelihood that a renewed America First environment would resist expanding employment-based immigration pathways, what contingency strategies or Plan B does South Korea have if U.S. labor mobility and visa opportunities for Korean workers and firms fail to materialize?
So I don't think that, I think that actually Woojin covered that quite well in terms of advancing discussions and negotiations about the visa categories. And there has been very, very slight movement. And I think that actually there was a lot that Eugene kind of told us about that was new to me. So it's good to hear that things are moving in that direction. And I believe that there was an office that was created a working group that was created specifically for the visa issue, right? And there is an attempt to either make an exception for South Korea or to make these really minor amendments that South Korea can sort of work around. But the question is, it's really about time, right? So I don't think there's any hurry to begin this process immediately. There's already been a severe delay, right, in plan. So it's not like this can be sort of picked up immediately. But as for contingencies, I do think that it will be a matter of perhaps more kind of lower level negotiations between those who are representing business interests as well as representatives from the United States and South Korea. But I think the tricky thing too is that what kind of precedent this would send, because as Ujun was saying, if South Korea is successful in some of these negotiations, will this mean that they will be the only country that is exempted, or that is for these visas, or does it mean that the U.S. immigration policy will be going in a different direction? And I think that most policymakers are very hesitant to go in that way. So, please.
Thank you for the question and thank you for the comment. So a lot of Korean companies, they are working with Korean government officials. I can share the details as I am involved in many of those efforts. They're coming up with creative ideas and presenting those ideas to the decision makers within the U.S. So whether decision makers, Congress or Congress or the executive branch will buy those ideas, I don't know, but there are a lot of efforts being made to improve the situation.
So there is a working group that's been set up. It's based in Seoul. So it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the U.S. Embassy consular team in Seoul. They've had 2 meetings. They've also, within the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, created a Korean business desk inside consular affairs to work more closely with these Korean investors to help answer these questions. The American Chamber of Commerce in Korea, AmCham Korea, my old organization, they've done 2 or 3 different meetings recently for their members, and they have a lot of Korean company corporate members with visa experts and the U.S. Consul General talking about this as well. So again, I think in the short term, both governments are doing everything they can to facilitate more travel. And again, I think after the President Trump, I understand in our firm, we have several Trump 1.0 former colleagues. So there are Trump whisperers, and they tell me that he was quite unhappy at the raid and the outcome and the way it was handled. And we haven't seen any large scale raids like that involving Korean companies since then. Not to say that there won't be one tomorrow or there isn't one happening right now, because I think Woojin is absolutely right. ICE has been given a quota by Stephen Miller of 3,000 arrests a day. And the best place to find those are at large construction sites. Who's doing large construction sites? Right now, it's TSMC, it's a few Japanese companies, and a lot of Korean companies. But again, the Korean Embassy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think they are well aware and doing everything they can to work with their companies to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But again, who knows?
And also, many Korean companies do not think the visa issue as a significant risk, for their U.S. operations, U.S. businesses. But after witnessed what has happened in Georgia, they now see the visa as one of the greatest risk area for their US business. I mean, before even well-known Korean companies relied on like small travel agencies and sometimes mom and pop size brokers to apply for their visa and get the visa advice. Now they have noticed that they can lose multi-million dollars every day if they fail to comply with the visa.
So culturally, our countries are very different. When Koreans apply for a visa, they still mostly use visa brokers. When I was at the AmCham in Korea, we helped Korea become visa-free. And one of the things we did, we created the first AmCham visa referral program that the United States State Department offered. And we did that because I went to the State Department, I went to the embassy, and I said, why are our companies, Korean employees, being rejected? And they sent me to the US. I sat at the State Department. I learned how they adjudicate visas. Then I went back to Seoul, sat in the embassy for a while, learned how they did it. And when we created the AmCham program, all of the AmCham members, so these were Korean employees of American companies at that time, they had to come to me and I would adjudicate their visa. I would say, Mr. Kim, where are you going? And he'd go, I'm going to New York. I'm going to run down and see my kid who's at Georgetown, and then I'm coming back. And I said, well, your visa application says you're going to LA and you're staying at the LA Hilton. And Mr. Kim, is this your signature? He goes, yes. I'm like, are you going to LA? He goes, no. I'm like, so you're not staying at the LA Hilton? No. Mr. Kim, you've committed visa fraud. And once you commit visa fraud, it's in the system. And then many Koreans, after that bad thing happens, they would go to London or Japan or somewhere else and apply at a different US embassy. Well, guess what? All those embassies are connected. They know that Mr. Kim created or had a visa fraud thing on his background. So I was able, and many of my Korean friends, I'm the visa queen. I know how to reverse those because if you can show factually, and again, the visa brokers just didn't ask the questions. And Koreans didn't understand that, if you put your name on that document is everything. But by the same token, the US has some we have some interesting laws and regulations. If you have a felony conviction in Korea, in order to trade, you can get a 1-year visa at a time, but you have to go to the US Embassy and you have to be fingerprinted every year. You know who has felony convictions in Korea? Almost every chaebol chairman. So the chairman of Hyundai Motors, who's invested probably now close to $50 billion in the United States, he has to go to the US Embassy every year and be fingerprinted. And every time the US Embassy gets a new consul general who doesn't know Korea and doesn't have the background, when somebody from Chairman Chung's office calls and says, we need to come in and renew the visa, can we get a authorization to bring our car in? They're like, no, you have to go get in line like everybody else. America, we treat everybody the same. Often it's badly, but everybody the same. And then that chairman's office will call me and I'll call the ambassador, or in this case, Kevin Kim, our new chargé, acting ambassador, and say, hey, can you help the new consul general understand that some of these chaebol chairmen do need to be treated differently because they are creating, J.Y. Lee of Samsung, he has a felony conviction. I gave an interview to NPR and they're like, what do you want Americans to know? I'm like, I want them to know that a felony conviction in the US and a felony conviction in Korea are very different. In the US, if you have a felony conviction, you're probably a criminal. In Korea, if you have a felony conviction, you're a playa. You're a major conglomerate. Often felony convictions in Korea are political in nature. So it's very different. Our cultures are different.
So a good example. So in the US, if someone dies at the factory, that does not necessarily mean that the company is liable, right? But in Korea, if someone dies at a factory owned by a company, the president himself is liable criminal, personally liable criminally. So it's a strict liability. They don't ask, even if the company has done everything that they could do to prevent accident from happening, because it's strict liability criminal law, they have to either pay criminal fine or serve time. So that's a good example.
think I'm learning a lot tonight. Let me take one more question.
My name's Rosa Park-Takola. I'm a contractor with Nobles, working on Korea, Japan, and Singapore. And I have a question about turning this very unfortunate incident into an opportunity for multilateralism. So first, I know that the Australians do have a successful visa program that's completely separate. Have the Koreans and the Americans at the Korean embassy or the US embassy in Korea, have they thought about bringing in the Australians to kind of advise on the visa process? And then the second question is on bringing Japan into this conversation as an opportunity for trilateralism. Could the Koreans and the Japanese work together to create a separate visa categorization? Because from my point of view, that could be more powerful in Congress than like bilaterally pushing for that or lobbying for that in Congress.
Well, I'll take the trilateral one. I'm also a vice chair of the US Asia Institute, and we have a trilateral program. In fact, tomorrow is our third one, our last one, and it's with staffers from Capitol Hill. And visas are one of the things we're talking about. But one of the challenges with that from Japan's perspective is this didn't happen to them, and it hasn't happened to them. So they're not, and there's a lot of historical baggage that Koreans know much better than I about why they might not want to, work so closely with Japan. But we are seeing much more warming, two new leaders in Korea and Japan, and they are working together. And maybe this could be an issue, but ultimately it requires a Congress to change a law. And in the environment with immigration right now, it's going to, I couldn't agree with Woo Jin more. It is such a hard, tough environment. We have a lot of Americans who think that immigrants, and immigrant means really anybody who's not in my family, that it must be bad for me, that if somebody else is, getting jobs here. But I would argue that, if there are Americans who could do that, they would. It's cheaper for these Korean companies to have American workers doing this plant construction and the machinery installation. But we don't have that workforce shortage, the skilled labor. That's been a problem for US company for decades. Our H-1B visas, we have a limit of only 85,000 a year. That goes by lottery, and it's gone in seconds. So Americans, and it hits the tech industry very hard. My tech clients are screaming and have been for decades, but it hasn't been resolved. And you mentioned, isn't this a solution for multilateralism? I don't know if you've noticed, but right now our leader is not particularly fond of multilateralism. He likes bilateral because, if it's the US against anybody individually, unless it's China, we can bully them. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't know how realistic it is to go that way.
I'll just also comment on trilateral coordination. So if you asked this before October, I would have said perhaps because I think that the former Prime Minister Ishiba would have perhaps been open, especially because he was leading a minority coalition, and he did make significant overtures, to Lee Jae-myung, and so there was some possibility that things were changing. But with the election of the current Prime Minister Takaichi, I don't think it's possible. This is another case where domestic priorities are going to conflict with diplomatic relations because now you have a far right prime minister that is leading the LDP, which is in coalition with no longer in coalition with the Komeito, which was a moderating force for the LDP, but rather in coalition with Ishin-no-kai, which is a far-right party that ran on anti-immigrant sentiment. So it would be very politically costly for her, especially in her coalition with Ishin-no-kai to venture in that direction, especially when it comes to visa policies that, also have repercussions for Japan's immigration policy.
If I could be a bit more blunt, I think the term multilateralism is perceived as many American politicians, especially on those who are on the right-wing side, as a term China used when they want to be opposed to American policy. And to me personally, I think for a lot of different reasons, multilateralism is that, or it's going to die very soon.
With that, I think that was the last question. Before we wrap up, I'd like to extend a big thank you to all our distinguished speakers. I also want to thank our staff for making this event possible, Habin and Ravina. Thank you for the delicious kimbap. I really enjoyed it. And Andrew and Sharon for a wonderful collaboration in putting this program together. And of course, thank you all for joining us tonight. With that, let me conclude today's event. Thank you.